So we're here today to celebrate Jane Austen's 250th birthday. That's what we're celebrating
Mm.
today. Jane Austen is one of my favorite people. She's even a Google Doodle today. If you look up, she's got the bonnet, and they correctly put a beaver hat instead of a top hat, which is very nice. But Mark, what do you know about Jane Austen? Wrong.
I I don't know a lot. And the reason I say that is because I know enough to know I don't know a lot. So in that sense, it's not that I'm disinterested, and I am not a super fan, but I've been a lifelong, or for as long as I can remember since I first read it, fan of, for example, Pride and Prejudice, and I I also have a secret soft spot for Death Comes to Pemberley, which obviously isn't Austen, but you know it's in that world. Uh, but I think I'm also particularly sensitive um, to moments when that weirdness of sort of Regency through into Victorian era costume, customs, and uh, technology kind of blurs in lots of popular culture, I think. So, especially, you know, when you're thinking about also Napoleonic stuff as well, so it's an interesting time to think about, and I can't help but think that today I'm not going to do very well in this quiz.
Well, you mentioned Pride and Prejudice, which is good.
Yeah. Hmm.
But as I always say, being a teenager is thinking Pride and Prejudice is your favorite, and then growing up and realizing that Emma or Mansfield Park is the best one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because as much as we all love Pride and Prejudice, she's saying something very distinct and very obvious with that book.
Mm.
And as I say, being a teenager is thinking that that book is about romance. And then
Mm.
growing up and is realizing that Lizzie doesn't love Mr. Darcy until she sees how big his house is. So,
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is there not a reading there that that she loves how she loves the context of his upbringing and the people that he's surrounded by and how much they adore him?
um, if we're talking just the book and not any of the screen
Mm.
adaptations, even though the BBC one is absolutely excellent,
Hmm.
um, she really only starts to feel for him in text when he helps her sister
Right.
because she has a bit of a panic about what's gone on with Wickham
Hmm.
and her sister. And Darcy, instead of doing the bad thing, which is what he did with Bingley and Jane, her older sister, he does the right thing, and which is he's in a position to help and make things not look bad. And
Mm.
so he does the right thing, although I would argue he should have just let them rot because the both of them were horrible.
They were. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
But he does the right thing, and that's when Lizzie kind of turns and says, "Okay, I can like this guy." Um, so let's start at the beginning, Mark. When was
Okay.
Jane born? If today is her 250th, this is December 16th, we're 2025. If today
Uh,
is the, assuming you know your math, 250th, when was Jane born?
well, 200 years back
Would be 50.
would be 1825, minus an extra 50 would be 1775.
Excellent, very good. There was a
There
famous
you go.
historian who was on a famous program who did not get that right. So,
Oh wow, there you go.
yes,
Okay.
it's December 16th, 1775. She was born at the
Yep.
Stephen Rectory in Hampshire. And obviously she was born the daughter of Reverend, her father was a Reverend, or her father was a vicar,
Hmm.
and Miss Cassandra Austen, who her sister is named for. And she is the seventh of eight children. And she
Right.
had six brothers. Two most important brothers were her favorite brother, Henry, and her rich brother, Edward, who we'll get into in a bit. And her
Hmm.
favorite friend was her sister, Cassandra. Okay, so was Jane Austen educated then?
Uh, I don't know. I'm going to just say the thing I'm presuming. I'm presuming she had access to libraries and perhaps book collections of her friends and family.
She was actually educated. Her father ran a
Okay,
school. Her father sent her to school with her brothers. And so
brilliant.
she and Cassandra went to school at Oxford, Southampton, and Reading. And she was actually educated. And she wasn't the only writer in the family either. Her
Okay.
mother wrote as well. Her eldest brother James was a poet, which I don't think many people know. And we still have many of his poems. And Cassandra also wrote. Obviously, she wrote letters. And Jane often said that it was Cassandra who was the best, the funniest, and the best writer in the family. But Cassandra
Interesting.
seemingly didn't have an interest in that kind of thing. So she just never, she wrote to Jane and they exchanged lots of things in their letters, but she was never really interested in making it a career. So when did
Hmm.
Jane start writing?
Oh, uh, something in me suggests that it was relatively late.
She was published relatively late. She was published
Okay.
at 35, but so not bad, but she started writing when she was very, very
Hmm.
young, and she started
Okay.
writing plays to be performed at home. And
Right.
they
Well, of
did
course.
perform
Okay.
them at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
And she wrote all of her juvenilia, so Love and Friendship, she wrote around 1790. Leslie Cat,
Juvenilia.
yeah, that's what we
That's a
call it.
wonderful word.
That's what we
Yeah.
call it, yes, her juvenilia. Leslie Castle in 1792 and Lady Susan, which eventually became obviously the movie Love and Friendship, which I would argue Lady Susan is one of her best, in
Okay.
1794. She began writing, as far as we know, at the age of 12, and she didn't really stop until she died at 41. Uh,
Wow.
which book then, of her famous novels, which
Hmm.
book did Jane write first?
Oh, I see. You see, now I'm almost feeling shame.
Well, the one that people
I,
start to say is Northanger Abbey because that is
yeah.
the one that she actually wrote an early version of Sense and Sensibility called Eleanor, which called
I was gonna say yeah.
do you
Okay.
want you want
Okay.
to take a
Go.
guess of what it originally called?
I don't know. I
She
don't know
originally
now.
called most of her books after their main characters, and so
Okay.
Eleanor and Marianne is what it was called, the early version of
Okay.
Sense and Sensibility, in 1795, before
Hmm.
Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey was the one that she put for. Technically she put in an early version of Sense and Sensibility, and she wrote of First Impressions, which became
Hmm. Uh,
which
Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice in the autumn
Yeah.
of 1796.
Hmm.
And her father offered the early versions to publishers and they were rejected.
Hmm.
Dummies. And it wasn't until 1789 that she wrote Susan, which was the original name for Northanger Abbey. And
Okay.
then they put Northanger Abbey in for publishing and they took it. But did it get published right away, Mark?
I'm guessing not.
No, no, no.
No. Hmm.
Um, no, unfortunately not.
So,
And
so, you may be about to go through this in further questions, but just have a couple of questions come forward here. First of all, I'm curious. Presumably, she couldn't put this to be published herself. It was her father who had to do it,
well,
by the
a
sounds of
lot
it.
of there are yes, her father helped her, and obviously her brother Henry was her biggest fan, and he
Hmm.
helped her after her father died. And yes, her father was the one who went to the publishers originally
Right.
and was the one who put them in. But a big
Mm.
misconception, especially about women at this time, is that they weren't allowed to do things. They weren't allowed
Mm.
to write. They weren't allowed to. That's not true at all. Jane actually
No.
had many contemporaries, Fanny Burney, um,
Hmm.
Mary Wollstonecraft.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there
Mm.
were lots of it was fine for women to write novels because they
Mm.
weren't writing serious subjects, but women did write novels. And it was also common practice for women to not put their names on their first books or authors to put their names on the first books
Mm.
because they were introducing the work as it were. And then it would say by the author of so and so on their second book or their third book. So
So,
it's a little bit
uh,
of a misconception that women couldn't do things themselves. They could, and
uh,
they did.
and to be fair, I certainly wasn't presuming that she couldn't, in so much as, and the same goes for schooling in that sense. I didn't think that she couldn't have gone to school, but I wasn't sure, given her status, whether she was a bit like Lovecraft, and just had access to books, as it were, and just soaked up stuff. But the main reason why I was curious is in so much as it sounds as though there's potentially still a bit of a an issue with in terms of getting meetings, for example, and that kind of thing,
Yeah,
perhaps.
she needed even but the thing is that even Henry didn't have success later. She
Mm,
when so her father in 1801 her father retired, gave the
mm.
school to one of their sons, and he took Jane and the family in lodgings at Bath.
Ah,
And Bath. Jane actually didn't really seem to like Bath, but
no,
it was a means of publishing her books. And
yeah,
so while they were there, she wrote the Watsons, which I mean she kind of never finished. And
mm,
her father was the one who was pushing her books to publishers. But
mm,
then, just a couple years later, her father passed away,
mm,
and they left. And Jane and Cassandra were forced to depend on their brothers. And they moved first in with her brother Frank for I think about a year, and then they
hmm,
moved to Chawton, which is where the cottage is. That's the famous cottage. And after her father died, they had to depend on pretty much Edward. And Edward is an interesting brother because he was given away to the knights. I mean, technically, it was a relative who didn't have an heir, and so it was popular at the time that if you had more than one son, you're like, hey, you can have this one, and you can adopt him. And so he did. I mean, even though he was adopted by that family, Jane went to visit him all the time.
mm,
And this is where Jane obviously he had a lovely wife who again unfortunately died young. He had 11 children, including Jane's favorite, Fanny. That was her favorite niece, and whom she possibly based Emma from. So there's a lot there with Edward, but Edward had £15,000 a year. And a lot
mm,
of people have said, well, if he had so much money, because that was a lot, that was bank in them
hmm,
days.
hmm, hmm,
And if he had so much money, why didn't he help the family more? And the thing is that Henry was banker, and obviously his bank ended up collapsing, which we'll talk about later. But his Edward, even though he had riches, obviously he had 11 children, his fortune was not really his own. He was still an adopted son, and there
mm,
were many challenges to his inheritance, and he ended up losing quite a lot of it eventually.
yeah,
And because as always, when there's money, there's problems. And
yeah,
so, even though he was the avowed adopted son, there were other relatives who stuck their oar in and wanted a piece of things. And so the
mm,
cottage at Chawton was always a bit shaky, but he
mm,
gave it to Jane, their mother, and Cassandra to live in for as long as he had it. And they were able to live there rent free with Martha, one of their best friends. And they moved there to the famous cottage in July 7th in 1809. And
okay,
that's where Jane wrote the chief of her novels. She stayed there, she revised everything, and she ended up having a pretty decent maintenance there.
mm,
They were certainly not wealthy by any means, even though they had access to Edward.
hmm,
They didn't really get an allowance. So even though they lived rent free, they were they had to make a shift for themselves, as they say. So
hmm,
they had no choice. Um, and so to your question, Mark,
hmm.
when was Jane first published?
Uh, 1806.
1811 was it's
Oh,
when she
okay,
was
okay.
35, the revised edition, or essentially the Sense and Sensibility that we all know. So even though Northanger Abbey was taken to be published
Hmm,
for £10, which was good money in them days, the publishers never published it, and they held on to the rights. And so even though eventually obviously she did get the rights back, she paid them back the money,
mm,
and she did get it back. But so technically Sense and Sensibility was the first book that was published, and she used her own money to publish the book. Actually, she wrote it as by a lady, and although she sold the rights to her next published novel, which was
was that Sense and Sensibility?
No, Sensibility was published first. Pride and
Oh,
Prejudice was published
sorry.
second.
Okay.
She was very disappointed in how things turned out. So in 1813, Pride
Hmm.
and Prejudice was published, and it's said on it by the author of Sense and Sensibility. And
Oh,
then
only 2 years later. Okay.
yeah, and then she just ran with it.
mm,
1814 was Mansfield Park.
hmm
1815 was Emma. 1816, Henry was able to finally buy back the unpublished manuscript for Northanger Abbey.
hmm
And then 1860, Jane started writing what she called the Elliоts, which ended up being which bookmark?
I don't know.
Persuasion.
Okay, thank
Persuasion.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, because again, she named the manuscripts after, usually not always, but after the name of the character.
I'm such a bad guest. Um, but
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 it
but so well, can I just ask you on terms of these published works?
mhm.
My second question was going to be about the title convention of sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. It sounds sort of almost kind of timeless. There's something very kind of witty and on the nose, obviously, about these titles, but also there's a sense almost of what you might call today franchise building. There's a recognizable pattern. You know what I mean? To those two. Do we know how and where the titles came from? Because
Well,
for
she
me,
changed she changed the title of Susan. So I
yeah,
mean, there were lots of books that were named after characters in that time.
mm,
She changed the title of Susan because a book came out with
mm,
with called Susan, so
the
she
name
had to change
Susan,
it
right?
to Northanger Abbey.
Mm,
It was a fashion to name things after people and places. So, for example,
mm,
Mansfield Park, Emma, that kind of thing.
mm,
But
mm,
for Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, they were titles that sounded good, and
mm. Well,
even in French, raison, sensibilité is still
mm,
pretty good. It's not bad,
mm,
and
mm.
it's just how it is.
Because for Sense and Sensibility, for me, it almost sounds a little bit forced. Uh, com- but at the same time, yeah, it works. I've just always been curious about that, and yeah. So, but and also, but then again, she didn't continue with that. So it wasn't just establishing a pattern, was it necessarily?
Well, again, it was a fashion, and so I
Mm,
think especially when it comes to Emma, Emma well, so Mansfield Park named after a place, right? Northanger
mm,
Abbey named after a place.
mm,
Emma named after the main character, and so she was able
mm,
to because there wasn't another book that sounded similar.
mm.
And then the Ellis, which became obviously Persuasion, and the brothers was Sanditon. And unfortunately, she never finished Sanditon. She only completes maybe the first 12 chapters. There's a debate as to whether the last chapter is finished.
Right.
But in 1817, she became too ill to write. And Cassandra took her to Winchester, which is where she's buried. And in December of 1817, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion are finally published for the first
Mm,
time. And then they identify Jane as the author as all of the original books.
right.
And as confirmed by a biography that was later written by her family, that she had written all of these books.
Mm,
And we only found out about Sanditon. Well, we knew about it, but we only really, Sanditon was only published as a fragment in 1925. It was quite late.
okay.
But I mean, Jane was known in her lifetime. I think there was a
Mm,
big misconception that she wasn't known at all. People did know her, and they did know that she wasn't a secret that she wrote these books. People knew about it.
no.
She wrote it to people. And she did like when people gave her critiques of her books. She liked it a
Mm,
lot. She even kept in one of her lists, she kept a record of who liked what book and who said what about it. And so she used to call bad reviews pewter. She would say, "Oh, I like pewter too." So she
okay.
she liked when people actually read her books and gave her the commentary. And I mean, you could say she was disappointed in some things. I think she was
Mm,
disappointed that many people didn't like Mansfield because Mansfield Park is not a funny book. It's one
no.
of her books that has very little wit in it, but it actually has a big message.
Mm,
And the more Mansfield Park is more of a morality piece. And she also says lots of things about slavery in it. She also says lots of things about how the rich make their money, which
mm,
she was not very pleased about.
mm,
And I know she was disappointed people don't like Fanny, her protagonist, not her niece, because Fanny is a bit of a dip. She's a little bit of a killjoy, and she's
mm,
boring, but she comes from a very specific upbringing, and pretty much the only thing she had to cling to was her sort of religious hope that things would get better for her. And
Right.
luckily for Fanny, they do, but obviously not for many people they don't.
Mm,
But a lot of people have wondered about, Jane's religiosity, and people have said, well, her father was a reverend, so
mm,
but
mm,
she does have foolish vicar characters quite a lot, and she
yeah.
does take the piss out of the church also, and she makes
Well,
booty jokes. She makes
mm,
booty jokes as
mm,
well, so
mm, mm,
she had her misgivings with religion
mm,
as much as
mm,
she might have believed. We don't know. She never really she would say, "Oh, by the grace of God," in her letters, but she
mm,
wouldn't say, nobody said she was an ex exceedingly devout woman or anything like that.
mm.
So,
Okay.
Mark, were Jane Austen's books always about love?
No.
I would actually argue
No?
that none of them are about love.
Well,
Um,
no,
yeah.
exactly, yeah. Yeah. I think, but to my limited mind, it seems. Um, no, that sounds wrong. No, you know what I mean. To my limited and full, I
To
have
my
far from a
meager
full understanding.
understanding,
Yes, to my understanding, such as it is, I've always enjoyed and got the impression that she was an observer of people,
yeah,
and she appeared to take great pleasure in people's uh, in people's strengths as much as also as well people's foibles and people's weirdness as well. And this is one of the reasons why I think some of her characters are so strong, is because they are believably yeah, at times just weird, like the way
Mr.
that
Collins.
yeah, well, exactly, and the way that the people sort of have such clearly what we might call today having a sort of a sort of a contrarian or perhaps a more than one thought about something at the same time. And obviously, hypocrisy is a big aspect of how a lot of people come across, obviously, in her work. Um, do you think then that her writing indicates that did she? Because I don't get the impression that let's say that she was judging people. It sounds as though she was more or
Oh, in
less.
her
It looks as though
letters,
she
she
was.
judged a
She was
lot of people.
right. Okay. Okay. So it feels more as though she sort of just uh, Bill Hicks, the comedian, once talked about how he loved touring the South and he loved meeting people who would criticize you for reading, full stop, because he loved those people and so he would make jokes about them because he could criticize the thing that he loved. And in that sense, is that what you get from Austen, or do you think she definitely had opinions about people and she definitely was a bit like ugh about some of her
I think
her
it was both
observations?
because there were some people that she very openly disliked, like the Prince Regent. She absolutely
Mm,
hated him.
mm,
And she had a lot of difficult, at least from her letters, she did not have a good relationship with her mother, or at least
mm,
her letters say so, that
mm,
she had a very checkered relationship.
mm,
Probably due to the fact that Jane did get some offers of marriage that we know, at
mm,
least one that we know about, and she said no. Well, she said yes, and then she said no.
mm,
And I think her mother was very bitter about it because Jane could have secured, again, rich is just another word for safe. And so she could have secured a future and made
mm,
sure that she and Cassandra were safe because Cassandra was engaged to be married
mm,
and her fiance died. And
mm,
she just decided never to marry again. And so again, it fell to Jane to be like, do your duty and get married. And she had a very good offer. She had a Mr.
mm,
Darcy sized offer from Mr. Harris Biggs or Mr. Harris Biggs Wither, depending on how you want to term
mm,
him. And she said he was younger than her. Go, Jane. And she was really good friends with his sisters.
mm,
And he asked her one night, I don't know that she ever had any idea of his liking her, but she said yes, presumably on a whim. And the next morning she said no and then left.
right.
So we don't really know, I don't think we really know if it's because she got word that one of her books was going to be published that morning,
Mm,
or because her sister persuaded her, maybe you don't like this guy, or because she was probably not drunk at the time
Mm,
and realized, oh my God, what did I do?
mm,
And we don't really know. There's a lot of speculation, but in any case, she said yes and no. And then that was, unfortunately, sort of the beginnings of her very strained relationship with her mother. And she does criticize her mother a lot in her letters.
mm,
So I think it's both. I think she loved her characters because she could criticize them.
mhm,
And I
mhm,
think she disliked people because she could only criticize them in private. And
mm,
there were a
mm,
lot of letters that obviously Cassandra burned, probably to protect people that they criticized.
yes.
There's a lot of, speculation about, oh, it's because there was a romance. I don't really know about that because we know about Jane's romances. So
Mm,
I
mm,
wouldn't, maybe there was one that she was a little bit scandalous. I doubt it. That maybe
mm,
Cassandra wanted to protect Jane from, but I think it's more likely that it was really the people that they were gossiping about who, uh, it might have made Jane look bad. And so
mm.
she did it for that reason.
Okay.
Um, and so it's the same thing with all her novels. I mean, Northanger Abbey was a critique on Gothic novels. So Sense and Sensibility was really about the disenfranchisement of women, and
Mm,
how, if you look at what happened with Jane and
mm,
how she had to constantly move and leave and go about places, and then
mm,
she was given the cottage at Chawton by her brother, who owned it but didn't really own it. And a lot of the time, I think maybe she felt that she kind of wasn't really in charge of her life, which you can see in Sense and Sensibility a lot,
mm,
where you have three women who are not in charge of what happens to them at all. And
mm,
obviously, Pride and Prejudice, as they say, is Lizzie didn't really think she liked Mr. Darcy until she went to Pemberley with her aunt and uncle. Mansfield Park is really about morality. Emma is about snobbery and about
What?
somebody specifically getting taken down a few pegs.
Mm,
And Persuasion is about maturity, really,
mm.
and lots of comments about what people think love is about.
So do you think that in that sense then Pride and Prejudice has an aspect of practicality to it, pragmatism?
Jane has never been wrong about this.
Mm,
Even after she died, her favorite niece Fanny was courting, however you want to term it. She was with a young man whose name was
hmm,
Mr. Plumtree, and as far as we know about him, he had to wait a couple of years to get a living. And Fanny was an heiress. She was going to inherit at least most of what Edward had at the time. He lost a lot of it eventually.
mm,
And when it came to her having to wait for him to get a living, or her having to fend for herself, she chose not to go with Mr. Plumtree. And
mm,
Fanny instead married a widower with many children who was very rich.
mm,
And Jane was right again. And
mm,
even today, we know many people, especially since COVID times, who possibly are in relationships of practicality,
mm,
and where you're like, well, it's a relationship of security, and it's just here because it offers safety. And that was
mm,
really something that Jane, especially in Pride and Prejudice, was talking about, which is,
mm,
yeah, love is very nice and romance is fleeting. And sure, you can go off and have a fling, and maybe people will talk about you, maybe people won't. But even in Mansfield Park, she talks about this, where
mm,
Mariah goes off with Mr. Rushworth, who is a horrible man. And he's just stupid. There's really he's just terrible. And he goes on about not knowing what to do with the approach of his house for hours. He's just boring, and you can see that Mariah hates him. But she marries him anyway because he's the only one who's asked her,
mm,
and it's a matter of security.
mm,
And especially for women, maybe in I wouldn't say too high class, but middle upper class, where you're
mhm,
sort of the bottom rung of the gentry. If you didn't marry for security, you better damn well have loved him
mm,
because
mm,
that's all you're gonna get.
mm,
And
mm,
some women chose not to, or even obviously Jane makes that commentary in Pride and Prejudice with Charlotte, right, where she marries Mr. Collins,
mm,
and she said, "Well, I'm a burden on my parents," and it's actually not too. Charlotte's fine with her situation. She's like, "He
mm,
doesn't bother me. He's not here most of the time, and he doesn't treat me badly. He's
mm,
not great, but I get to dine at Rosings many
mm,
times a week. I have a house. He has a living. This isn't a bad deal." And Charlotte is quite honest, whereas Lizzie thinks that this is the worst thing in the world because she's married Mr. Collins. We could talk about whether or not that makes her, uh, whether or not Lizzie is sort of jealous because of what that means for Charlotte being somebody who is now uh, connected to the entail that belongs to her father's estate. That's another
mhm,
comment. But look, if you think about the way that Lizzie thinks about marriage versus the way that Charlotte thinks about marriage, Charlotte doesn't have a choice. And so
mm,
she instead decides to make a marriage of convenience, but she makes a practical choice where she has a place where she's not going to be bothered, probably for sex.
mm,
She's not going to, she doesn't have to see anybody, and she can command her own time and have her friends over. And she actually has a good place. Whereas
mm,
Lizzie is a bit more in the clouds about this. She is an obstinate, headstrong girl. She wants what she wants. But she too, about halfway through the novel, is now thinking, my sister's marriage is now at the time not going to go through. I might have to do something. And I
mm,
think she is persuaded by Pemberley and
mm,
obviously by the fact that Mr. Darcy now likes her. But it's really the fact that he does something kind for her. That's just she says,
mm,
okay, I could probably live with this.
mm.
Um, does she really love him? I don't think that's the comment that Jane is making in Pride and Prejudice. Uh,
Well, I suppose at the very least we can't know within the bounds of the book.
there are there
I'm
are
just I'm
there
sorry,
are
I'm being overly romantic about it. Yeah, no,
but
you're
it's
right.
true.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
people have done, their PhDs on Pride and Prejudice alone and
yeah.
about the language, the very careful language that she uses,
Mm,
um, talking about love and romance. So I think you
mm,
would have to ask them. But for my money, none of her books are about love. They're
mm,
about the things that people have to do, men and women, in order to be safe and have a decent maintenance. I mean, I think maybe the only person who marries really for love in Jane Austen's books is Mr. Knightley
mm,
because he is a gentleman farmer. He has his own land. He has good friends. He takes care of his neighbors. Mr. Knightley is the king of kings. He is good to his friends, good to his neighbors. He looks after the elderly. He looks after the poor. He's the only one who doesn't make fun of Mrs. Bates. Like he is the golden standard of romantic men in
mm,
Jane's world. And yet he still falls in love with Emma, who's a bitch. And
mm,
he almost doesn't. There is a moment where he even says, I was ready to give it up because you were too far gone, you were being too mean, and I didn't want to admit that I loved you. Also, he's a bit aware of how is about inappropriate their relationship might have been, not
mm,
only because they're family friends, but he met Emma when she was very young. And obviously there's some family connection there because his brother is married to her sister. And
mm,
so they kind of fell in love really by proximity. And so Mr. Knightley was a gentleman about it. And he just said nothing for
mm,
ages. And he didn't want her to know, hoping that. And then when she sort of, but not really expressed interest in Frank Churchill, he was prepared to let her go and,
mm,
and not say anything. But then his hope kind of rekindles. But it's really, and he says in so many words, despite the fact that you were not nice, I still love you
mm,
in so many words.
mm,
But I think he's the only one who does it for love. But he is in a position to do it for love.
mm,
And he doesn't give his love away. He really doesn't. He holds on to it until Emma
mm,
is knocked down a peg and
mm,
apologizes to the people that she was mean to. And it's really when all the lives that she's played with and ruined are fixed. And then she sort of merits his affection. And she
Mm.
also realizes that herself, it's really when Harriet, her best friend, or the person that she manipulates into being her best friend, it's only really when Harriet thinks that she's in love with Mr. Knightley that Emma realizes, no, I should be with Mr. Knightley. This is stupid. Why am I being dumb about? Because Emma says to me, she's like, oh, I don't have to marry. She always thinks that she's just going to take care of it. She's going to be alone and take care of her father until he dies, whenever that is, and that she'll just be with him forever and she'll be at Hartfield alone. And she's totally fine with this until she is threatened with Mr. Knightley's never coming back, that she realizes that she loves him.
Mm.
And she even realizes halfway through the book that she's not in love with Frank Churchill. He might be in love with her, which she mistakenly thinks, but she kind of gets over it in 5 minutes and realizes, oh, I don't really love Frank Churchill. Never mind.
Mm.
So she lets him go quite quickly, and they just become friends, and that's it. But it's really only when she's threatened with Mr. Knightley never visiting them again that she realizes I've been an idiot, and that's it. But I still think, I mean, maybe Emma does really love him. I think maybe she does. I think
Mm.
it's really just because they've been together for so long that she has no other model for love. Whereas Mr. Knightley, I think, is the only one who's really the model of love in most of Jane's books. You could say
Okay.
we could talk about Captain Wentworth and Anne in Persuasion. I would say that Anne uh, certainly was in love with Captain Wentworth. And then Jane says it rekindles, obviously, when, again, it's the same thing when Mr. Elliot is kind of manipulating Anne into thinking that he likes her, or thinking that she should like him rather. I think that Captain, again, it's a whole thing of like, well, no, I should have, I should say something, I should do something. And Captain Wentworth obviously realizes that he was being a dunce for liking two other girls. Um, and he was just being stubborn and he was being vengeful because when he asked Anne the first time, she said no, and she was persuaded to say no to him by Lady Russell. But Lady Russell, in this instance, really wasn't wrong. I mean, we could argue about whether or not she's a good person, Lady Russell. I think she meant well. I think she was worried that Anne was getting taken in, and she didn't want her to get taken in because Anne didn't really have a mother to advise her, maybe this is not a good idea. Maybe this man is trying to manipulate you. I think Lady Russell did the best she could at the time, and she
Mm.
did stand in place of a mother, so Anne trusted her. And I think Captain Wentworth understands that. But do I think Captain Wentworth really loves her at the end? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, his letter is probably the bomb. His letter to her, his profession of love. Like everybody goes, Mr. Darton, like, no, no. I mean, I love Mr. Knightley's confession, but Captain Wentworth's confession, hands down, is probably the most heart-wrenching, loin-quivering thing you'll ever read.
Wow, loin quivering,
Loin-quivering,
quivering. Yeah.
yes.
So it,
Flesh-quaking, yes.
yeah, so in that sense, uh, what what this is going to sound silly to possibly to people who have just come here for Jane Austen, but I'm curious, what do you think she would make of the question that you're always asking people about The Witcher and the relationship between the protagonist and Yennefer and Triss in that sense. Do you think?
That's an excellent question, Mark.
Wh-
I
Hmm,
think Jane would love their little love triangle.
hmm,
But I think she's making the same comment, which is, do Yen and Geralt really love each other, or is it just
hmm,
genie stuff? And is genie
hmm.
stuff really love?
Is it enough? Yeah.
Or is
Hmm,
it enough? Or did they come to love each other because of genie stuff?
hmm.
Or is it, once the spell is broken, do they really love each other? Or again, is it just the lasting effects of the spell? And in Jane's case, I would say that she
Is it
would
well in that
probably
sense? Is it
say,
is it is it sort of affection in that sense through exposure? You know.
that's an
Yeah.
interesting
Hmm,
point, which I think, especially in Emma's case, I think that's where she goes, is affection through
hmm,
exposure. And it's the
Mm,
same thing with Marianne and Colonel Brandon, where Colonel Brandon, again, is that just very kind, protective character who's
mm,
always there for Marianne. And therefore, I think that she has a sort of affection. She learns to love him,
mm,
where it's not like that outright love or romance. She's like she learns to love him. She realizes he's going to give her a decent maintenance and
mm,
protect her for the rest of her life. And so therefore she says yes. And I it's interesting that you mention Geralt, Yen, and Triss because I think there is a similar commentary there, which is
mm.
Geralt just can't quit Yen, even
No.
though he should, and even though she's been horribly mean to him. You know, in the books, she cheats on him and makes fun of the fact that he has no emotions.
Mm,
Even though in the book Geralt has a lot of anger, so it's not true that witches don't have emotions. They might not have fear, but he certainly is very cranky.
mm,
But I think it's the same. I think she would make the same commentary, which is
mm,
you know, there's no true love, and that's what she says in a lot of her books is there is no true love. You have to make a decision. You have to make a
mm,
choice. And I think even in her own life, she made a choice,
mm,
and which was she's like, no, I I think I should make a go of it on my own. She had a
mm,
lot. She had Tom Lefroy, I would argue, is not, you know, is not her Geralt because a lot of people make a big deal about Tom Lefroy. It was a
mhm,
flirtation of a summer
mhm,
and
mhm,
it passed, and that was that.
mm,
I think he was her Mr. Willoughby for sure.
mm,
Because he ended up going off and marrying an heiress. Isn't that
mm,
interesting? And we do know from comments from his family that they thought Jane was a little bit lowborn.
mm,
So they separated them, but very obviously he ended up okay. He ended up as a lawyer, and he ended up with a lot of money, so he was fine.
mm,
Whereas Mr. Harris Biggs, I think, was more of Jane's Darcy.
mm,
And she had that choice of being very rich in a Pemberley, surrounded by good friends. Like I said, she was friends with his sisters. She would
mm,
have had a good life, but she would also probably have expected to have heirs, which
mm,
she very obviously had no interest in. So that was
mm,
that. And then she had another man who she was possibly romantically interested in. There was, I think his name was Blackwell, but he was possibly um, uh, a Mr. Tilney type character, where he was set up for a living, and then but he went off to go marry somebody else and be in Ramsgate. So again, I don't know. I really think she didn't feel that true love or that need to marry. And so
mm,
she went, well, you guys can go off and marry for your convenience, but I'm not going to. And I don't think anybody would have ever prevented her from writing.
mm,
I think that the gentlemen who were courting her, or at least offering her marriage, understood that this was part of the deal. And like
yeah.
I say, it wasn't an eccentric thing for women to write at the time. Women were making good money, and Radcliffe was making good money. As I said, Fanny Burney making good money.
Mm,
So she could have done it, and we'll talk in a minute about how Jane actually made. But I think all of her books were quite clear about where she stood on true love, and I don't think she would have said that Geralt and Yen were true love mates, but I think that they were
mm,
just, it was a marriage of convenience.
mm, mm.
And I don't think she would have thought that Triss was his true love either.
No,
So,
no. But she is an excellent contrast. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm, yeah. Mm,
Um,
okay.
so speaking of which, Mark, let's get to it then. How much do you think Jane made in her lifetime?
Oh, I wouldn't really know how to frame it. In so much as relative values of money. Uh, would she be the equivalent of, well, sorry, would she be the equivalent of a multimillionaire?
No, 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 no.
No. Okay. No. Okay.
Now,
Uh,
yeah, but no, not back then. So she made £10 from Northanger Abbey, which is good money in them days. She actually did.
so,
Um,
oh, £10 for the rights, that
yeah,
is.
for the rights. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
it wasn't,
Right.
but unfortunately, it wasn't published till after her death.
No.
But she made off the original printing of Pride and Prejudice, she made £110. Pretty good in them days.
Okay. Okay.
Jane, though, was disappointed and she thought that was a poor return on investment. which is why she changed how she published things later on. Um,
So what was the model then? Was it did she not get ongoing royalties then?
it really royalties were kind of not it in them days. I mean, you could argue for it, and
Or equivalent, you know.
Yeah, equivalent. Henry did push for more money. Second printing, second editions was a big thing that they would pay
Hmm.
for. But even Henry tried to get a second edition of Mansfield Park, and the publishers refused. They didn't want to do it. And
Right.
so, when Emma was coming around, they did buy the rights to Emma,
Hmm.
but she was persuaded to dedicate Emma to somebody she hated very much. And she absolutely hated the Prince Regent.
Hmm.
And she dedicated it to him because she found out that he was a fan of all her books.
Right.
And so she was given dispensation to dedicate Emma to him. And that was kind of like, I mean, there was no awards in her lifetime, but because she did dedicate Emma to him, it did gain popularity.
Right.
Um, and so, you know,
Mm.
but by the time Emma came out, she was on the just on the cusp of being very well known.
Mm.
And so her lifetime earnings for all her books while she was alive that we know of in writing was £684, which would be how much today, Mark? Around, do you think?
Uh, I'm gonna guess 10,000 maybe.
Well, a lot more than that. It's around 67,000 in
Okay, 67. Okay.
today's money.
Okay.
So good.
Okay, so
She
it's
she
roughly a
actually
factor of 10 then.
she didn't do too badly. I mean, she was disappointed with some sales, and she really thought she would make enough to live on, but not bad in
Mm.
general for books that came out in succession. Um,
Yeah.
she but she did talk about how she loved to go to London and spend money.
Hmm.
She talks about the things that she bought. Obviously she bought things for hats. And she did like to buy her family members things. So she did like to spend money, but we could tell that her mother was maybe a little bit disappointed. And
Right.
but the rest of her family certainly supported her.
Okay.
And they did read her books and they did like her books, some more than others. What did Jane die of?
Uh, was it consumption?
So the real answer, you're not wrong, but the real answer is
Mm.
we really don't know.
Oh, okay.
Some people have suggested TB or consumption.
Hmm. Hmm.
Other people said that it's more likely that it was Hodgkin's disease, because every other person in her family lived to old age.
Right.
Every other person the Austens had astonishing longevity, but
Mm.
not Jane. And
Right.
so she died at 41. And she complained of things like shaking in her hand, pain in her back,
Okay.
but we really don't know. There have been lots of people who have tried to crack this, but I think it's impossible to know. And Cassandra lived well into her 80s. So
Right.
if it was TB, it's a bit odd that Cassandra never caught it because she was the one who
Proximity.
nursed Jane.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So we just don't know.
No.
And that's that. What was the last thing that Jane published?
Uh, did didn't you say persuasion?
Persuasion was published after she died.
Oh, okay. Right.
So the very last thing Jane
Uh-huh.
ever published was 2 days before she died. She wrote a
Uh-huh.
poem to Cassandra on Saint Swithin's Day. Mark, when is Saint Swithin's Day?
I'm going to kick myself. So go on. When is it?
It's July 15th, Saint Swithin's Day.
Yes, yes, yes,
And
yes.
it's a poem called about, I mean, it's not titled, but in true fashion, it's when Winchester races is the first line of the poem. And she
Okay.
wrote this poem on Saint Swithin's Day to her sister. And it's a very funny poem. It's a very tongue-in-cheek poem about rain on Saint Swithin's Day. And so I'll read it to you here.
Hmm.
When Winchester races first took their beginning, it is said the good people forgot their old saint, not applying at all for the leave of Saint Swithin, and that William of Wykeham approval was faint. The race, however, were fixed and determined. The company came, and the weather was charming. The lords and ladies were stained and or satined and ermined, and nobody saw any future alarming. But when the old saint was informed of these doings, he made but one spring from his shrine on the roof of the palace which now lies so sadly in ruins. And then he addressed them all standing aloof. O subjects rebellious, O vented depraved! When once we are buried, you will think we are gone. Behold me immortal, by vice you're enslaved. You've sinned and must suffer. Then farther he said, these races and revels and dissolute measures, with which you're debased a neighboring plain, let them stand. You shall meet with your curse in your pleasures. Set off on your course, I'll pursue with my reign. Ye cannot but know my command over July. Henceforth I'll triumph, and showing my powers, shift your races as you will. It shall never be dry. The curse upon Ventra is July in showers. And so
Nice.
she wrote this because everybody was absolutely mad for the Winchester races on St. Swithin's Day, and absolutely nobody was going to church.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so she thought it was funny. She thought, well, St. Swithin made it rain and pissed on all their pissed on all
Nice.
their
Nice.
yeah.
Nice.
And so that's that. And it is written. So she passed away, and she died in Winchester and was buried in Winchester Abbey, which is where she still is to this day. Um, and it says, and the paper which announced her death said as follows, it said the 23rd of July, 1817. Miss Jane Austen, youngest daughter of the late Reverend George Austen, formerly rector of Steventon in this county, authoress of Emma Mansfield Park, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, because that was all that was published in her lifetime.
Hmm.
Her manners were most gentle, her affections ardent, her candor was not to be surpassed. And then it says she lived and died as became a humble Christian, which was common. So, but even in the newspaper, it said that she was the authoress of these books. So anybody who's trying to claim that she didn't write them, go fug yourselves.
Do people actually do that?
Oh yeah, there's a whole thing of
Wow.
people saying that either she didn't write, she wrote them together with somebody else, or that there's also lots of claims that the publishers finagled the books a lot
Hmm.
because on the original manuscripts there's a lot of writing, but that's publishing manuscripts, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
No, she wrote them. Everybody knew she wrote them. And this whole idea, we really get the idea that she wasn't well known in her time because
Hmm.
she did fall out of favor for, a couple of years and she sort of waned. And then it was good old Queen Victoria who really loved her books and made her extremely popular. And so then it sort of took off and everybody knew who she was. But she was pretty decent for her day. She was a radical in certain ways, making good commentary in her
Hmm.
novels, because novels were still seen as a bit silly,
Hmm.
depending on who was reading them and who was writing them. And hers were not very silly, even though
No.
even though some people might have thought so. And she loved when
Hmm.
people misconstrued her titles. She loved to say, if you think my books are about love, I think you need to read them again. So
Hmm. Hmm. Oh,
anyway,
wonderful.
those are the life and times of Jane Austen. Happy birthday to Jane. And we could talk a lot about her family and about her extended family. But I think we have delighted you long enough.